Glenn, how's it going? Do you want to give a quick intro?
Yeah, Glenn Antoine, been in technology for, I must say, 30 years and not get carried away with the numbers because I really don't want to count exactly. So 30 plus years, started with the U.S. Navy in advanced aviation electronics, and that due to the space I hung out in there, it drove me to want to learn more about cybersecurity and also to get my engineering degree. I've had a couple different companies. I've worked for a lot of startups. Uh, Past number of years, I've spent a lot of time working with venture capital and private equity firms doing merger and acquisition diligence to help do assessments on companies and the technology space, from cybersecurity assessments to custom software, code quality, code vulnerability, and helping them understand their potential investment and what additional investment, if any, uh, or what strategic plans they should make in order to get that investment to a point where they can hit their desired multipliers in the number of years that they want to hold it. It's all based on their investment thesis. And currently, due to my passion in aviation and being a pilot, I focus on working with the aviation community and helping draw parallels between what happens in the cockpit and all your planning and everything for a successful flight to how that correlates to running your business, managing your technology, and more important, your cybersecurity posture in managing risk. Because in the cockpit and in pretty much any flight, a big portion of what you're doing is managing the risk and looking at your instruments. Your instruments are basically very similar to all the inputs to your business.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're on the ground today, I see.
I am, unfortunately.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember you telling me you would want to do everything from the sky if you could.
I would fly every day if I could.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's one of these days I'm gonna have you in the cockpit. We're gonna go take a flight somewhere.
Okay, we have some interesting stuff to talk about today. I wanted to
Absolutely.
cover some stuff about AI use cases, some things about security and RAG as well. Do you want to start with, you sent me an email recently talking about a specific use case that you were trying to work on. Do you want to start with that?
Oh, absolutely. So one of the things, there's so many use cases,
Yeah.
but one of the things that I'm a huge fan of using AI for is as a collaborator.
Yeah.
It's not going to replace me because it doesn't have my background, the strategic knowledge that I have, and so many things that just you're not going to replace a human. However, for the mundane things that take up time that I can shortcut or become much more efficient, now it becomes a multiplier for me. And so, one of my favorite books, 10x is easier than 2x.
Yeah.
It helps you operate at a 10x level without the monotonous, mundane things. And one of those is in the process of doing any kind of a diligence assessment. There are times you have hundreds and hundreds of documents.
Right.
One recently, I had 850 documents.
Yeah.
I don't have to review every one of those,
Yeah.
but often in just obscure documents, there will be things that impact or relate to the technology space,
Yeah.
spending, and other business planning. And so you never know where details will show up that I need to be keenly aware of. And in a perfect world, I would be able to have that entire library of documents parsed and be able to do some very elegant prompting, if
Yeah.
you would, to mine the data out that's very specific to me and the scope areas that I'm focused on. And not only that, pull that information out in the context of the various scope areas. So it's not just one scope area. So it may be cybersecurity, it may be software development lifecycle, it may be their architecture. The list, it just goes on. It could be infrastructure. So I want to pull it out in those contexts. And so I want the information and I want to know what document it came from and even down to what page it came from. So now I can jump right to it and verify, trust but verify
Yeah.
that it is not lying to me.
Yeah.
Because as you well know, heuristics and all kinds of stuff, it'll lie to you.
Yeah.
And I've had AI continually tell me, I'll challenge it. Is that right?
Yeah.
Where did you get it?
Yeah.
Where did this information surface from?
Yeah.
How is that related to, and it'll come back and go, oh, you're right. That came from memory or
Yeah.
that came from these documents. I'm like, and so it's you've got to constantly challenge it and not take it for granted.
Yeah. Completely.
And so um, I've seen a number of use cases where you could take that AI set up local. I'm not going to be publishing that out on the web due to the sensitive nature of these documents, but set it up highly secure, encrypted, all kinds of stuff
Yeah.
to lock it down, ensure that anything I'm working with are from vetted sources. Way too many people get in a hurry to implement whatever it is, especially anything custom software. AI is no different. And they forget all the normal best practices. Security goes out the window. It's
Yeah.
not going to happen to us. We're not a target. Well, guess what? The minute you take that approach, you're a hacker's dream.
Yeah.
'Cause now you're just banking on someone not stumbling across you.
Yeah.
Um, or you not picking up some open source library or whatever it may be that they have corrupted that it will now infect your prompts, your data, give you false information. The list goes on and on. We could talk for hours about that.
Yeah.
But for me, that's a great use case personally, where I believe it would apply to in your space for attorneys.
Yeah.
If you've got a lawsuit of some kind, you probably have mountains of documentation that you may need to go through. Well, you set this up, and now you can put it to work where you do it, where you're focused on doing the things you have to do and shortcut some of that research time.
Yeah. Completely. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, you're touching on something really powerful there with the having a RAG architecture around an agent. So giving the agent the context, the information, the specific documents that you needed to have in order for it to be valuable to you. Something else that's really interesting. Have you heard of knowledge graphs? Are you familiar with knowledge graphs?
I know of it. I have not dug into it.
A knowledge graph is similar to it's 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 used in RAG, and it's similar to your normal sort of vector database. But what happens in a knowledge graph is you store the you store the chunks of information, but you also store the relationship between the chunks. So, for example, you can imagine like a in a knowledge graph, you could have OpenAI is one chunk, and then ChatGPT is another chunk, and then the line that connects those chunks being OpenAI created ChatGPT. So you store the not just the chunks and their semantic embeddings and their vector embeddings, but you also store the relationship between chunks as well.
That is, and now that you're saying that, I did read a couple articles on that, and um, a context that I could put it into is for a lot of marketing. If anyone is in MarTech, you can think of a shopping cart. I can have an image or I can have a product and I have an image that goes with that product. Well, I may need a lot of metadata that goes along with that image so I have context,
Yeah,
like for different colors, sizes, go down the list. If you've, if you're shopping on Amazon, oftentimes you have all these options that you can select. Well, it's additional context. It's metadata that amplifies or relates back to that one specific piece of information.
yeah,
Your knowledge raft is doing that. It's keeping all this context linked
yeah.
so that it becomes much more powerful.
Yep, yep, yep. And it is definitely a lot slower than your traditional vector database, but it depends on your use case, obviously. If you have a use case where you need to really understand the intricacies of the relationships between different documents and different data that you have, it can be a lot more useful and powerful. And it's useful also if you're going to build up those connections over time, right? Because like a traditional vector database or a vector store, you could upload 400, 500 documents at one time, and it might take you maybe an hour or less to upload those documents. But if you're in a situation where you're going to start with maybe 10 documents today, and you're going to build up those documents over time, over months or years or however long, then it might make a little bit more sense to go with a knowledge graph sort of situation because you're going to be building those up over time. Those relationships are going to compound over time, and it's not a situation where you kind of need to dump all the documents in all at once and get something useful out immediately, you know?
Yeah. Well, and even if, let's say you're adding a huge, the, in my context, oftentimes I'm getting documents added in over several weeks.
Yeah,
Well, as those documents start coming in, I don't have my full database, but as it's building up, I can leverage what's there.
yeah,
And so I've got to look now if someone just does a complete dump all at one time, which is unusual. It does happen.
yep,
That's where a vector database would get me up and running in a matter of a couple hours. Um, but there's nothing that's a one size fits all.
yeah,
Let's go back to that. But an incredibly powerful tool that makes what we're talking about even more powerful.
yeah,
It gives you more, gives you options, gives you all kinds of additional capabilities. And um, I started thinking about using that in conjunction with a vector database to where now I've got a system with these in the back. And so now I leverage where I can get my information.
right. As in combining a knowledge graph with a vector.
Absolutely.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah,
Almost like having a relational database that is for my transactional database. It allows me to do, all my day in, day out stuff, like my CRM or whatever it may be. I'm in there and I'm doing stuff day in and day out, and or my accounting database. I'm doing all my accounting day in and day out, invoicing, payments coming in. However, oftentimes you will have a separate reporting database that is constantly being filled with more data, but it's structured differently to give me much more powerful reporting.
yeah,
It also makes it faster than trying to do that in my relational. Well, let's take a step back to our knowledge graph and our vector. Why don't we use those in a similar situation?
yeah, completely. Yeah. And then you could always just build out two different tools. Give your agent two tools, one to search the vector database and one to pull
A-
from.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So I could create a single pane of glass, if you will, where I've got one interface and I leverage whichever back end I need based on a particular use case.
Yeah. Yeah, that can be really powerful. I talk about N8N a lot. Have you experimented with N8N at all?
I like this much.
Okay.
Focused on some client work and
Yeah.
everything. Matter of fact, I'm looking at I've got a old laptop sitting over here with Linux on it.
Yeah.
old MacBook. I've installed Linux on it, and I'm going to set up N8N on it and set up a proof of concept, if you will.
I'm gonna give you a link in a second in the chat, but it's basically going to be the starter kit you can use to get started with the local N8N setup. And then that way from there you can pull in your local language models in there. You can set up a local database. It comes with Quadrant, which is a local database installed as well.
Oh,
Um,
nice.
I'm gonna drop the link in the
I've
chat.
seen a few of them, and I actually installed Docker version of it on my laptop where we're talking right now.
Got it.
That was pretty slick. It took no time to set up and start running, but I really didn't do anything with it. Just wanted to go through the install process and play with it for a minute. And I was like, okay, sweet. That's all I need to know. Now I can do what I really want on my dev machine.
Got it. Okay, so then you might already be set up, but I just dropped it in the chat for you in case because I know there's a you can install just N8N, but there's also a sort of a self-hosted package that comes with Olama, which allows you to install local language models, which comes with Quadrant, which allows you to kind of get started with your own local database. So if you
This
haven't had that already, you can take that link and use that as well.
this is nice.
Yeah.
I like this. I don't believe I saw this repo on the N8N GitHub account. Oh, and this has even got a Docker Compose already. This is slick. Very nice. I like that. I like this one a lot.
Yep.
Thank you.
Completely. No problem. And it just takes a couple minutes to get started.
Is this what you use to get yourself set up and leveraging N8N?
This is so I have a few different N8N instances. So I have an N8N running on the cloud on my
Oh,
own, cloud droplet, and then
yeah.
also I have N8N locally as well. So I have two different instances.
Okay.
If I'm ever doing anything with local AI, I'll use the local setup, and then if I'm using cloud AI systems, then I'll just use my cloud setup. But for the
So on your local, are you leveraging RAG?
I have I built out a RAG system actually? That's a good question. I don't think I've built yet a completely local RAG system yet.
For anyone that might be listening, tell us about RAG. Why do I care?
Got it. So RAG is short for retrieval augmented generation. And essentially we can break that down, right? So retrieval just means if you think about the way I put it usually is like this. If you think about your language model, your LLM, your AI as an assistant that's sitting in a room in a library, right? And you tell your assistant to write you imagine you're an attorney and you ask your assistant to write you a summary of a certain case or a summary of the way that a certain judge has ruled against your firm in the past, right? Your assistant probably doesn't know that information off the top of their head. So a normal human assistant will say, I don't know. What AI will do is will just hallucinate and come up with something, right? But with a retriever, what you have is essentially a librarian that your assistant can go to and say, listen, I need this information about this specific question. And then that librarian can go off into the library and pull the books that are relevant to that question and give those books to the assistant so that the assistant can then go and actually formulate a coherent response for you. Because what happens a lot of times when especially lawyers get really frustrated with AI either hallucinating or not giving accurate responses, you have to kind of think of it as an assistant, right? You wouldn't lock an assistant in a room with no context, with no books, with nothing to look at or nothing to reference, and ask somebody to do, complex legal analysis. You'd give them all the training they need, you give them all the context that they need in order to be able to do whatever task you need them to do. So when we think about retrievers are essentially that librarian, right? And then augmented generation just means that whatever context that the retriever or the librarian goes off and brings back to the assistant is going to improve the response or the generation that the system gives back to you. So that's what a RAG pipeline is essentially. It gives you a database or a library that you can input information into that later on your model can then go and grab the information from and use to generate more coherent responses going forward.
How does that librarian know where to retrieve this data from?
That's another good question. So then that's when we start to get into embeddings, right? And we start to get into the nature of AI itself. What is happening is essentially whenever chunks are stored in a database. So sections of a document will be stored in a database, and each of those chunks is stored with a specific embedding, and an embedding is a long string of numbers, of a lot of numbers. OpenAI embeddings, for example, I think has about 1,500 numbers, but each of those numbers is stores some sort of semantic meaning. For what's a good example? Maybe one of those numbers has to do with color, or has to do with number, or has to do with place. All of those numbers have some sort of meaning to them. And so that long string of numbers gets coded to the chunk of information that's being stored in the database. And then what happens is when you ask a question to your assistant then codes your question using that same series of embeddings, and then that same string of numbers at that same embedding, and then takes that embedding and uses that embedding to find all of the documents that are close in vector space to that embedding. So everything that has a similar meaning to that question will then be pulled from the library and given to the assistant so that can generate a response.
So what if I don't have it in my local database? Can I go out to the wild, wild west that we call the internet and use a resource there?
That's another good question because it's that kind of can add to your RAG as well, right? You can imagine an agent that has tools to one tool to pull information from your database, from your RAG database, but you could also give it another tool to search the internet. Obviously, if you've experimented with ChatGPT or any other language model, you would have seen all of these language models have a tool to be able to search the internet. So you can also add a tool to your agent to search the internet. I think something really powerful in the legal field is when we start thinking about databases like LexisNexis, um, being able to build a tool. I'm not sure how their API works, but if you can build a tool that could search that legal database and pull up all of the cases that have, precedent with whatever case you're working on now, that's also a really powerful tool as well.
So I'd be willing to bet a lot of the people that are listening to this have had their hands on ChatGPT at some point in time. One of the things that one of the capabilities of ChatGPT that gets discussed on a regular basis is a deep search. How does what we're talking about apply to that?
Yeah, deep research. Yeah, it's another good question. So now we're talking about kind of mixing in two different things because essentially what you're doing with deep research a lot of times is you're using a reasoning model and you're giving that reasoning model the tools to be able to search the internet. And so there are there's a famous book. I don't know if you've heard of this book. It's called Thinking Fast and Slow by Daniel Kahneman.
Yes,
You know the
that's
book?
a fantastic book.
It's a very, very good book. But essentially, in that book, if anyone's not familiar with the book, there are two systems of thinking that are discussed. You have system one thinking, which is your snappy decision making, right? That makes decisions right away. Like when if somebody throws a ball at you and you just duck or you move out the way, all those types of reactionary, very quick thinking is system one thinking. And then system two is more deliberate. So the best example is if somebody says to you, "What's two plus two?" You know off the top of your brain it's four. It's very deliberate. System one thinking. It's very quick. It's not deliberate. It's very fast, right? But system two is like if somebody says to you, "What's 73 times 680?" You probably have to sit there and think and kind of unless you're a math superstar genius, you have to sit and think and figure out what that answer is. So that's your system two brain. And up until I believe early this year, maybe probably end of last year, 2024, most AI models only had system one thinking. They didn't have system two thinking. They didn't have the ability to sit down and reason through complex tasks and decide the right course of action to take. Everything, which is also why we get a lot of hallucinations, right? Because AI is just saying basically the first thing that comes to mind, right? So that's essentially what we're getting, right? But with a reasoning model, what we get is we get system two thinking. We get AI with the ability to think through complex tasks. A really big breakthrough with this was when DeepSeek came out. Do you remember when DeepSeek came out to the
Yes.
public? So that was a really big breakthrough because um, DeepSeek is a language model that was released from a company in China, and what they had done is they had a reasoning model, an AI model that could think and reflect, but what they would do is they would show you all the thinking and reflection that it was doing as it was doing it. So you could literally see all its entire thought process before it gave you a response. But kind of coming and tying all that in with deep research is probably the closest thing you can get to an actual agentic use case when you're using something like ChatGPT, because you give ChatGPT an objective to research um, say to research any topic, say marine wildlife or something, right? You give it that sort of abstract objective, and then it can use reasoning to decide what is the best course of action to take in order to really put together a comprehensive report on this. And then it can go and actually use tools to go and research the different questions related to that, you know? So that's what,
Absolutely.
yeah,
Absolutely. That um, the context that you just provided would, I imagine that's very valuable to anyone that'd be listening because this is that having that context is important as a user, even if you don't want to know how to actually build the engine yourself.
yeah,
Actually having that context, I mean, I'll since I use the term engine, I'll apply that to driving a car. I mean, most people don't want to know how a combustion engine works, but they do know enough to know that they've got to put gas in it, and they know that they've got to get an oil change every now and then, and need to do certain amounts of maintenance at various periods in time. Uh, so I would say that AI is a lot like that. And in your case, as you're doing some of this, what are you seeing from the cybersecurity side of things?
yeah. And I think this is also a question I have to flip back to you in a second once I give my input.
Yeah,
I also want to touch on something that you said now where you talked about understanding AI and how it works and how that gives you a little bit more of an advantage and an edge. And that applies for obviously if you are a company or a business owner or a law firm owner thinking about how to use AI, the more you understand about AI, even at a high level, the better you'll be able to use it, right? But then it also applies for engineers as well. You know, if you're somebody like me that's building out an AI application or an AI system, the more you understand about a little bit about machine learning and about neural nets and gradient descent and that kind of stuff, it does help you out in terms of building applications. So like I can't explain every single mathematical function that goes into something like ChatGPT, right? But I do have a general understanding of tokens and logits and softmax and probabilities and temperature and all those. I have a general understanding of some of the mathematics behind it, and then that allows me to even something as simple as, changing the temperature on an application so that AI doesn't hallucinate as much, or so it gives you more deterministic responses. So whether you're an engineer or whether you're a business owner, just having a little bit of a high level understanding of things is going to be really helpful. And then as far as the security side of things, I pretty much I pretty much give people two pieces of advice essentially. One, the most secure option is always going to be with your own setup, either a local setup or running a local model on your own cloud droplet. That's always going to be the most secure setup because at the end of the day, if you're using a cloud AI model, you are still sending information off to that model, to that company. And most of these companies do have terms of service and they will protect your data, but at the end of the day, that data still has to travel off to them and come back. And so if you want to be absolutely secure, the best thing for you to do is to set up your own system. And then the other thing that I advise people to do is even if you do set up a local system or you have a model running in the cloud, um, that's not a replacement for doing your cybersecurity due diligence, right? So this is where they need to talk to an expert like you, to find someone like you and bring you in and have them actually walk through the the cybersecurity protocols that they're going to need to actually keep their stuff safe.
I'm going to put you on the spot and ask you a question I love asking business owners. You're,
Yep.
you're a business owner. Let's say let's say for a moment you have a law firm and you have 15 people working for you. So you're not huge, but you've got a team, you've got some, everybody's on computers, on and on. They're using tools like Zoom that we're on and others. Um, Number of applications from accounting to CRMs to, uh, I assume software that's specific to the uh, law firm world.
Yep.
where do you think their biggest vulnerability is?
That's a good question. I would, and I may be cheating a bit here because I've read some of your posts,
Yeah,
but I would imagine the biggest vulnerability is always going to be people and the mistakes that people can make.
that's it.
Yeah.
And I know you've read them, so I was teeing you up a little bit, but I
Yeah.
was quite confident you had. I harp on that a lot because
Yep.
it is humans, we're fallible. We make mistakes. I mean, for instance, get emails constantly every day from various hacker forums and stuff like that that talk about the latest vulnerabilities, new hacks that have taken place. Matter of fact, here we are talking about AI. Hackers love AI.
Yep.
It's made them much more efficient, made them much more powerful. Their phishing, all their social engineering, on and on, has become even more powerful and more hard to detect because it's so real.
Yep.
And so they're using it to evolve even faster than what they were. And that world was scary enough as it is, and now they've just put it into afterburner mode. So, it just security awareness for your employees, for your team, and ongoing. You can't just train on it once. There needs to be some annual training and then ongoing, like phishing simulations, where you've got a system set up that governs all this for you that will send emails to everyone on a periodic basis and it'll look real. But if they click on it, they shouldn't have, but there's no harm done because you're controlling it. But then it'll come up and go, hey, you slipped up here. And then it'll direct them back to training that applies directly to that specific use case.
Yep.
And so over time, you learn how to spot these fakes. And
Yep.
so people, we're going to make mistakes, but with ongoing training, we can get better and better.
Yep.
And that's where you start. If you do nothing else, start there.
Yeah. But I did want to ask you a couple questions about what are you seeing, one in terms of use cases, enterprise use cases of AI, and then also on the security side as well, things that you're seeing, maybe also some oversights as well.
Um, the low hanging fruit there is just simply not having a well socialized governance program. What I love is talking to owners, founders, leadership that tell me they're thinking about using AI.
Yeah.
Well, they may be thinking about using AI, but I can promise you their employees are using AI.
Yeah.
The problem with that is they're likely using AI on, their personal login for ChatGPT or any one of the other online chat tools. And so now, if they're not being incredibly diligent about what they're doing, they're leaking confidential information. They're in essence training someone else's models on what they do.
Yeah.
So that's the easy, low hanging fruit. So setting up some governance, educating your employees, finding out what their skill levels are, because you'd be amazed at how many people are using AI in some capacity. And so meet their employees where they are and start understanding how, if they're using it in any capacity at work or in their free time or whatever, how they think it would help them, and then setting up some governance to protect intellectual property, business details, client data, whatever the case may be.
Yeah.
So that's the broadest, easiest one to see. I see that constantly.
Yeah. Yeah. It touches back to what you were talking about earlier, right? Where people are the biggest risk factor.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. And it applies on the business side of the house, and it applies on the technology side of the house
Yeah.
because um, it can be an incredible multiplier for your engineers that are doing software engineering. Unfortunately, they've got to understand what they're doing, and more importantly, they've got to understand the code that gets created. And very, very high on the list is if any code gets generated and it references or pulls in open source libraries, understanding those open source libraries and any critical vulnerabilities or known exploits that are against them.
Yeah.
And one people always talk about the vulnerability side of it, to where an application can get hacked. But way up on that list is also the licensing type that goes with that open source library, because depending on how that is being used and the license that's applied to it, if you're doing development with that, you and it's got what's called a copyleft or a hard copyleft license, depending on your use case, where this is used, how it's deployed, and all that, you may have to share that information back to the repository where that library came from. And so now your intellectual property
I'm back.
is getting shared back to the public.
It's on GitHub now.
Yep.
Right, right, right. Yeah.
And there are a lot of companies that are, matter of fact, one of the areas that I've seen is that investors have invested in some of these libraries that are more popular and changed the licensing on them, because now if people are in violation of that, it's easily enforceable and it's easy revenue generation,
Yeah.
because most people would pay the fines and then turn around and pay for the commercial version of the license.
Right.
So you can, if you're the owner investor in that library, you can generate revenue quite easily.
Yeah. Yeah. I was just on a call recently where and the topic of the call was basically AI coding assistance, right? AI assisted coding. And it's the same situation as with if you're using AI in a legal context. It's you have to give AI the right context of what to do. You can't just have it generate any code from anywhere, right? So it needs to know what sort of best practices you're following,
Mhm.
what is your normal structuring and format for when you write code. All those things need to be given to your coding assistant as context in order for it to be able to do its job well.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Think of it as training a brand new developer that just came in.
Right, exactly.
So this developer, from the time they were 1 year old, 1 years old, by the time they hit that first birthday, they were probably on a keyboard typing, so they can type at warp speed, but and so they're incredibly fast and very efficient at cranking out code, but they're even more dangerous because they can go really fast, but really don't know what they're doing.
Yeah. Yeah, yeah. And I think that's kind of the best way to look at AI in all contexts. Like a first year, associate or a junior developer is the best way to look at it.
Absolutely.
Yeah. I do want to ask you quickly before you run, if I can ask you one last question.
Yeah, absolutely.
What about the best use cases? Where you see enterprises and companies getting the most bang for their buck with AI?
On the technology side, software development,
Yeah,
that's an easy one. So it can become done properly with the right governance and the right setup, it can be a force multiplier, on the tech side. On the business side, in the cases where you and I started out talking, in your case, in a legal setting where I have mountains of documentation to go through for a specific case, or I've got a ton of research that needs to be done to be as prepared as possible for a case coming up. I mean, right there, that's a force multiplier. So now, um, and in my case, I have huge amounts of documents. So something that would normally take me 2 days to go through and do it properly, I can do in a half a day now,
Yeah.
sometimes less,
Yeah.
depending on a number of factors. So a lot of this mundane work that's just monotonous, and you can spend, you know, hours of that time looking at stuff that really doesn't apply to your needs at that time, but you've got to make sure that it doesn't. You can't just assume that it doesn't. So you have to go through and do some research. And doing a directory search will help me a lot, but you never know how someone's going to word things. You don't know what phrases they'll use. So you're guessing.
Yeah.
And, you know, words that I would think would be very common and would show up may not be the case. And I assume the same happens in the legal space.
Yeah. It's kind of you start to talk about why semantic search is a little bit better than keyword search or Boolean search or those other kind of traditional searches.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So those are the two that I see most common. And then if we switch over to the cyber side of the world, using cybersecurity and cybersecurity, and your posture should be a high focus, and having the right tools, and now having tools that are leveraging AI to detect patterns and suspicious activity even faster.
Yeah.
It's key.
Yeah.
The bad guys are using it against you. You better have equal or more powerful tools to protect.
Completely. Thank you, Glenn. It was a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. This has been fantastic. Looking forward to our next conversation.
For sure, for sure. And we'll catch up later this week.
Absolutely. You have a great day, sir.
Okay, you do the same.
All right. Bye.